This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Yesterday, George W. Bush and Laura Bush sat down with Maria Bartiromo, of course, to discuss the legacy of George W. Bush's mom and Laura's mother-in-law, Barbara, former First Lady. But at the end of the interview, Maria Bartiromo asked the president about the current geopolitical landscape, and he suggested that we're forgetting the lessons of 9/11, former President George W. Bush.
As we see what's happening in the world today, from North Korea to Syria, we still have these radicals trying to undo who we are. Your thoughts on what to do and how to respond to what's happening?
Well, look, here's the thing. If you go down to our exhibit in the museum, there's a very powerful 9/11
I've
exhibit.
seen it.
There are two of them, here in Ground Zero. People are forgetting the lessons of 9/11. And one of the major lessons of 9/11 is the human condition elsewhere matters to our national security. It's in our nation's interest for women to be successful in the Middle East, for example, or for civil society to take hold. Because it's with civil society and people having a say in the future of their governments that the foundation for peace is laid. And so my thoughts are, remember the lessons of 9/11.
I don't know if we're forgetting that or not. I think the question is how to affect that, and can we nation build along the lines of the gambits that George W. Bush pursued. For more on this topic and all of the underlying implications, we're pleased to be joined by our friend again, Jed Babbin, former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense, contributor to the Washington Times and the American Spectator. Jed, thanks for joining us. What do you say in response to what the former president had to say?
Well, I think President Bush served extremely well, and I think some of the lessons that he is pointing to really were never learned. It's not a question of forgetting those lessons. It's a question of even defining what they really are. And President Bush, again, I think he served tremendously, far, far better than many presidents would have in those circumstances. But one of the things he rejected, and we've talked about this before, is to take on the ideology of radical Islam. The Islamists have an ideology which propels them and always will. It has for, 1,100 years. And unless and until that ideology is defeated, all of these groups will continue to rise, no matter how many of these guys we kill. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for killing the bad guys. But no matter how many of them we kill, unless we defeat their ideology, which Mr. Bush was refusing to do, we can't win the war. It's unfortunately as simple as that.
Well, it sounded like he thought that we should police the world. Do you feel that is our role?
No, I don't. I never have. I think that there are circumstances where we have to intervene, where our national security interests are at stake. But in places where our national security interests are not at stake, it is a huge mistake for us to intervene. And we can debate forever about the Iraq War. Looking back on it, I was one of the people who supported it. I don't think I should have. I think I made an enormous mistake. I think President Bush made an enormous mistake in invading Iraq. But having said all of that, again, we need to go to war only where our national security interests, our vital national security interests, are at stake. And unless we make a very clear determination and the president convinces the nation that we need to do it, I don't think we should be doing those sorts of things. We're not the world's policemen. Never have been, never should be.
Speaking of poisonous ideologies, how about the communists 90 miles south of Florida in Cuba? I don't know if you got an invitation to Raul Castro's retirement party, but
sounds like a real shindig. Huh?
Yeah, I bet it will be. His successor, Miguel Diaz-Canel, has been named. What do you expect, if anything, different with the transition of power in a post-Castro Cuba?
Well, I'm hopeful that the quality of the cigars will increase, but other than that, there's not a darn thing. No, I didn't get the invitation. I don't think I would have gone if I had, but again, the cigars probably were pretty decent. And no, at the risk of being serious here, nothing is going to change in Cuba. The regime is deeply implanted not only in the society but in people's minds. People in Cuba don't refer to the year as 2018, they refer to it as, I think it's the 68th year of the Cuban Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
That's how they figure time. They're so ingrained, they're so, frankly, brainwashed into it. Nothing's going to change down there in the foreseeable future.
So President Trump, with the Prime Minister of Japan yesterday, was talking about North Korea seeming pretty optimistic about their upcoming meeting.
If the meeting, when I'm there, is not fruitful, I will respectfully leave the meeting. And we'll continue what we're doing or whatever it is that we'll continue. But something will happen.
Do you I know they still have to choose a location, either Thailand, Sweden, Switzerland, possibly Seoul. Do you think it is in our nation's best interest for the president to sit down with Kim Jong-un?
Well, yeah, I think it is. I think he is playing it exactly right, at least so far. If we do not have an agreement on the agenda, if we don't have a good start to the meetings, the president should walk out, as he said he would. And, if the South Koreans come in with a positive agenda and try to make an agreement with North Korea even beforehand, that might be good. Mr. Moon, the president of South Korea, says they're doing that right now. And if Kim Jong-un shows up to the meeting with Trump and all he wants to do is harangue the president about, real or imagined problems that, he blames on us, the president should walk out. There's no reason for the president of the United States to sit down and listen to that crap, frankly. And, he's going to have to play it as he sees it, but I think he would be right in walking out in such circumstances.
Circling around to Syria, this questioning the official story about the chemical attack that precipitated the missile strike is not just a fodder for, Alex Jones conspiracy theorists anymore. Rand Paul questioning the official storyline, saying he hasn't seen the intel. And I'll leave it open if you want to make certain comparisons there. But is there any doubt in your mind, or do you think it's legitimate to question whether or not it was the Assad regime behind that latest chemical attack in Douma?
Well, look, there's always questions, but I think Rand Paul is, he's as much of a conspiracy theorist as anybody you're going to meet. He and his father, let's put it this way, he's a chip off the old blockhead, and I don't really take him seriously on anything having to do with national security. So having said all that, the real question to me is, yes, we hit them, yes, we probably should have, but the question is, what next? And there is no policy towards Syria or what we're going to be doing there for however long we're going to be there. As far as I can see, there is no policy. The president has not described one. And as far as I can tell, there is not one. So we have to come up with some sort of a policy that protects the Kurds and, quite frankly, otherwise just ignores Syria. We have to protect Israel. We have to protect the Kurds. Other than that, I just don't see why we're in there.
What about this suggestion that was made by Mark Dubowitz from Foundation for Defense of Democracies in the Wall Street Journal to slap sanctions on Iran as a way to stop Assad? He points out that Iran spent about $15 billion last year to bolster the Assad regime. They spend between $700 and $800 million each year to prop up Hezbollah, terrorist organization. And so why not reinstitute the sanctions on Iranian banks that do business with Damascus or with Hezbollah and trying to cut off the money the same way we're trying to cut off the money to Putin?
Well, that's a nice idea. I think it's too late. I think the Obama nuclear weapons deal, which Mr. Trump presumably is going to revoke on May 12th, really took care of all of that, and the Europeans are not going to join in new sanctions. The Europeans are desperately trying to convince Trump to not cancel the deal. They want to continue things where they are, and they're buying oil from Iran. So Iran's going to have money, regardless of what kinds of sanctions we put on there, if we do not have international agreement on those sanctions. So with the oil prices going up, which, by the way, benefits Vladimir Putin tremendously, the oil prices are going up, and Iran has a big supply of it, and it's just a question of what people are willing to do, what sacrifices they're willing to make. And I don't think our NATO partners, Europe, the Brits, the French, Spanish, and so forth, they're not going to be willing, nor are Russia or Germany or China, to be willing to cut off that deal and suffer the economic consequences. So, long way going about saying, nice idea, but ain't going to happen.
He is Jed Babbin, former United States Deputy Undersecretary of Defense, contributor now to the Washington Times and American Spectator. Jed, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.